Hey there, Bear Club! At the Mama Bear Initiative, we explore how to protect ourselves so we can protect our cubs, the people who depend on us. Join us and get the confidence you need to stay safe, make good choices, and protect yourself and those you care about. Let's go!
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Mama Bear Initiative podcast. I'm Stephanie Dunham.
I'm Evelyn Mason.
I'm Richelle Knapp.
I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We are going to be doing part 2 on abuse. And last week we talked about what abuse is. How do you identify what's abuse? And there's a surprising amount of things that are considered abuse that I wasn't aware of until I researched it.
Yeah, I think most people have no idea.
Yeah, unless it's like something obvious. Most people don't really know they're being abused or, are aware of what abuse is or what's considered abusive. I think, Richelle, you were telling us last week that a psychiatrist or psychologist was telling you in your childhood that certain behaviors from your mother was neglect. You had no idea.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to talk about today, how do you know when you're being abused?
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially when it's not obvious.
Right.
And a lot of times it isn't obvious. And we get out of a situation, look back on it and realize, oh, that was abusive.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when we're getting educated on what abuse is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about it. So one phenomenon I have always struggled with in my life up until recently is most of the time when I was being abused, I didn't realize I was being abused.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was in a situation and I was convincing myself that it was fine, even if I felt a certain way, that the problem was me, not the other person.
Yeah.
I made a lot of assumptions about what was going on, blamed myself, which is typical post-traumatic stress behavior, especially considering the childhood trauma. That's a development that happens during that sort of, growing up in an abusive environment. That's what happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
You develop a sense that you're always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if something's going on that you don't feel good about, that you think is wrong, you blame yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true.
And even trying to speak up, you end up getting silenced or shut down in some way.
Yes, that is another major point.
Mm-hmm. When I was 28, I'd been in and out of the hospital for suicidal thoughts and severe depression. And I was seeing a therapist at the time. And she was pushing me towards the idea that I had, in fact, been abused. And it was not my fault.
Mm-hmm.
You guys remember the scene in Good Will Hunting when the young kid's with the therapist and he's telling him it's not your fault?
Yeah.
It was similar to that. There was 2 sessions we had, and I was just talking, and she finally stopped me mid-sentence and she said, You've been severely traumatized.
Wow.
You've been abused. And no one had ever actually said that to me so directly before, and it caught me completely off guard because I was still blaming myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to say it out loud, and I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was terrifying, the idea that I was not responsible for what had happened to me.
Yeah.
Right.
And the end of the second session, she got down in front of me and she said, you were traumatized and it is not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
You were abused and it is not your fault. And she said, we're not leaving the session until you say that one time. One of those sentences one time.
Mm.
Right.
And
Wow.
I finally did, and it just completely, it undid me, for lack of a better word. Everything changed in that moment. I still didn't fully grasp what she meant or what it actually meant, that I wasn't responsible for anything that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it still was very hard to comprehend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just really difficult to think that it actually wasn't my fault. Because like you said, Steph, you automatically think you're wrong.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Well, a lot of times it's really drilled into you. If there's a problem, you're the problem. It's not the adult. It's not the parent. It's you're being a problem You made me mad at you. You made
Right.
me do this.
Right.
And of course, children just take that as at face value.
Right.
There's no evaluating. Well, actually, that was on dad because, he needs to maintain his, it's dad said it, it's true, and we internalize it. And then over time, it builds these belief systems. And if there's a problem, I'm the problem. I'm a burden, or whatever the thing we're telling ourselves.
Right.
And meanwhile, there's the abuser abusing. We have no idea.
Right. And that's mainly because children just can't and won't know what abuse is.
Yeah.
They can't. I mean, unless somebody tells them.
Yeah. And even that, considering that a person's brain isn't fully developed until they're in their mid-20s,
right,
all those deeper issues and things, the child cannot really grasp it. But if you can put it in a way that they do understand, at least it's not your fault.
Yeah. I remember when I was around 9 years old, my mother, for whatever reason, got it in her head that I was pretending to be my stepfather's wife because I sat in the morning at the kitchen table and drank my hot cocoa while he was having his coffee.
Wow.
And she kept me home from school and berated me for like 2 hours about that.
Wow.
Yeah. I got to school late that day. And I think I realized in that moment something wasn't right about what was going on, but I could not tell you. I just knew that, that's not even remotely true.
Mm-hmm.
He's drinking coffee at the same time I'm having hot chocolate before school.
Right.
I'm not choosing it. He's choosing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Second of all, her issues of jealousy or whatever just didn't line up with reality.
Right.
Right.
And this was not long after they had gotten married. Like, they got married when I was around 9, so this was somewhere between 9 and 10.
Wow.
Well, maybe sometime between 9 and 11. I'm not sure. But it was sometime in that period where we lived in California, and we were in this rented house in Columbia. And, I went to school every day. We were only allowed to drink hot chocolate in the winter and Tang in the summer.
Yep.
And every day before school, we'd have hot chocolate and oatmeal.
Yep.
That was pretty much it. So what option did I have but to sit there and drink hot chocolate?
Right.
Right.
We're too afraid not to drink hot chocolate.
Right. Seriously.
And what were your options, really?
I didn't have any.
And the fact that you happened to sit with your stepfather.
Right. And that's
Like,
because he was up, not
was
because
up.
I was trying to.
You
Right.
weren't trying to seek him out. And
No.
even if you were wanting to spend time with him, that has absolutely nothing to do with somebody
be
you've
his
never
wife.
even met before, trying to be like his
She thought
first
I was
wife.
trying to be his wife.
His wife, just
like
period.
his adult wife sitting and sipping coffee with him.
How would
So
that even
ridiculous.
enter a child's head?
Right.
But that's the irrationality that can happen with these things.
Right. But she was gaslighting me, making me think that I was actually trying to make me think that I was actually doing that.
So weird.
And I resisted it. I don't know what I said to her. I really don't remember. But I was resisting in my mind to myself. That's not even true. So, I just, but that was like a moment of self-awareness. I don't think that's pretty common with kids.
Right.
Most of the time, you grow up and you go into adult life not realizing all the abusive stuff that happened when you were a kid was actually abusive.
Right. It's just
Until
it was your
somebody
normal.
tells you.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing we were talking about before we got on today was how most kids just assume that whatever life is like at home is normal.
Right.
Everybody lives this way. This is the way moms are. This is the way dads are. This is home life. These are, the way siblings are. This is just normal.
Right.
Until they see or hear otherwise. It's just the way a child's mind works.
Right. Now, if you did grow up with abuse in your childhood and as an adult you seek out help, you might start to learn about what it is, and then you kind of understand what you're seeing if it happens as an adult. But I think people who did not experience that, if they get into an abusive relationship as an adult, don't even realize when they're being abused. Now, people who were abused as kids also get into that situation.
Yeah, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
that's true.
And in fact, I think it's probably more likely that a person who was abused as a child is more likely to get into a relationship that's abusive as an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Because
familiar.
that's what's normal. Because
Yep.
that's what you were saying. That's what they're used to.
Right. And I think also, you can get into an abusive relationship as an adult because the abuse is taking a different form.
Right.
Like, for example, if the mother was, hitting the child or whatever, you get married, well, he doesn't hit me, so he's not being abusive.
Right. And because, people are misidentifying behavior as, well, that's just how they are.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And not like correctly identifying the behavior as abusive, then they're just sloughing it off as, that's just them, even if it's bad or wrong.
Right.
And just excusing it, not like seeing it for what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think not seeing it for what it is, I think that's key, because in my situation, for example, the person that I was in the relationship with was very loving. I'm air quoting here. Was very attentive. He seemed to really know me, and I loved that. He would focus on me, and he would ask me all these questions, and I thought that I was being loved.
Right.
And, there were some abusive behaviors in my home life growing up. This didn't look anything like that. This guy really cared about me, or so I thought. So I had laid down some very strong beliefs about who I thought he was based on those early days.
Right. But let me rephrase that question. What was abusive about that early behavior? Because it's not as easily recognizable as some other behaviors like physical or sexual assault.
I think it was more the motive behind it. And he would even say things about how to win a woman kind of thing. It was sort of like a game. It seemed like a game to him. It seemed, now in hindsight, he was doing whatever it took to get me where he wanted me to be. So he had an idea of what he wanted in a wife. He had an idea that he wanted me to be his wife. So he was going to say what I wanted to hear. He was going to do what he thought it would take to win me over. So it was deception.
Right. And manipulation. And coercion to, because if we're not, diagnosing Evelyn's ex-husband.
Right.
Okay. So let's just be clear about that. But if there's a pattern of a certain kind of behavior, in this case, narcissism, then it can be clear that the whole point of that was love bombing.
Yes.
The love bombing phase is meant to manipulate and coerce somebody into falling in love with somebody who wants to manipulate and coerce somebody else to get them in their grip so that they can do with that person what they want.
Yes. And I think part of it is also you get swept off your feet. I was thinking about that, where I think part of the love bombing is sort of short circuits where your mind might start to question. You're just so in this wonderful vortex of affection and attention, and you're believing it, and you're not questioning any of it or the motives behind it, because you want to see things the way he's portraying them, because it looks beautiful, it looks wonderful, it feels really good.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
When I met my ex-husband, our parents had just passed away within 7 weeks of each other. And I was in a very vulnerable state. I was not in any shape to do any sort of committing. But I jumped into a relationship with him because I didn't want to be alone. It had nothing to do with him directly. It was just someone who seemed interested in me. So I just jumped into it without thinking about it. The behavior was there at the beginning. The bad behavior was there at the beginning. The abusive behavior was there. There was a little bit of love bombing, but I was so blinded to because of my loneliness that I just jumped into it without thinking about it. And because of the grief I was experiencing at the time as well.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different from what you experienced with your ex-husband, but it was still similar in the sense of like, I think I was kind of gaslighting myself. I think I was kind of gaslighting myself into believing that this was what I wanted. And I did that the whole time. And then we got married and it was a disaster. So there's a little different twist there, but it's still the same idea of not knowing or not seeing the abusive behavior. It's very insidious in that way too, because it doesn't have to always be so overt like a physical act. It can be something as simple as manipulation or just bad behavior towards you in general.
Right.
And you're too blinded or just don't see it for whatever reason.
And you're convinced this is a good guy, this is a good person. And even, I'm trying to think if anyone saw anything or tried to warn me. It seemed like he had basically everybody fooled. Like they were all so happy for me.
Yeah, I mean, people like that can be charming to the point of, it's like a fisherman with a rod and a hook and bait.
Yeah.
They cast out the bait on the hook attached to the line, and when they catch something, they yank it in.
Yeah.
Because, the prey is convinced this is a good meal. Right? And an easy meal. And they get pulled in. So, the love bombing phase is meant to pull people in.
Right.
And, there's a whole cycle to this. I mean, there's an abusive cycle that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with narcissism that the people go through, which you can look up on the internet. And there's also a specific one for narcissism.
Right.
But, that initial phase. So I guess what we're trying to say is that it's actually kind of difficult to realize that you're being treated abusively. If you're minimizing what the other person is doing, if you're not recognizing it as abuse, if you're not willing to look past your own comfort, it's really difficult. However, and this is going to be the second half of what we're talking about.
Yes.
There's these things called red flags.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, I think talking about red flags has become more prevalent in society. Like, there's a downside to the internet where everybody's just kind of a jerk.
Right.
And too opinionated and too willing to say what they think because there's this degree of separation between yourself and who you're yelling at.
Right.
Right.
Or whatever. But I also think there's a good side to this because it seems like there's so much more information available at your fingertips. Like,
yes.
If you're wondering what a red flag is, you can just Google it.
Right? Yeah, look it up.
And to be honest, I didn't realize that till recently that there was an opposite of red flags called green flags.
Right.
And there's probably yellow flags. I haven't researched this that much yet.
Yes, how nuanced is this? Let me get the orange ones.
But I was like, we can have green flags too? It's not just red flags waving in our face?
It doesn't necessarily have to be all negative, right?
Yeah, but
here we're talking definitely about
red flags. And red flags are really behaviors that we have feelings about.
Yes.
Yes. You just feel like, okay, he's saying this, but he's acting like this. And that's undermining what he's saying. And which part will I believe? And I think initially I just wanted to believe that, there's red flag waving in my face and nope. And I would come up with an excuse. So I wouldn't have to deal with the ramifications of what if this really is a red flag. Plus, I really, really wanted him to be who he portrayed himself to be.
Well, yeah, because you wanted to be swept off your feet. And you wanted to be a wife and mother. And here was somebody doing and saying all the right stuff.
Yeah. And he seemed so supportive. But then there would be little digs, little comments where he would say, he would tell the kids, don't you disrespect your mother. Don't you talk to your mother that way. But then he would say things
Right.
when I would start to rise up a little too high or something, where I started to think for myself a little too much or start
Right.
to contradict something he was saying,
Mm-hmm.
then there would be ways to try to put me back in my place. And at the time, the red flag was there, but I was also in this weird fog.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you were saying, oh, that's just him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's just like that. It's okay, because I still believed under all of that he was a good guy.
I think people have a no harm, no foul mentality about abuse way too much.
Yeah,
Mhm.
agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Something that you can remember, people should remember, people will tell you who they are.
Yes.
When you're getting to know somebody, they will tell you exactly who they are. I think people see their behaviors as good and they don't realize it's not good. So they'll just say it. I've listened to people talk about themselves and they tell you exactly who they are. You should believe them.
Yeah.
And if you see the behavior happening, and they have a lot of red flags, I would suggest not engaging with that person anymore, because that's when abuse can start. And not everybody has red flags are abusive, but there are certain things you should look for. If they're telling you that they're like, for instance, maybe they're rude to other people, petty or whatever like that, and that kind of thing bothers you, don't engage with them anymore, because it's not going to be good. You're going to have issues with them down the line. That's not necessarily abusive, but it could be.
Yeah, it could get to that point.
Well, yeah, those kinds of red flags are based on your value system.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're against sort of petty behavior, even if it's not abusive behavior, and you're just against being petty in general, that's probably not the kind of person you want to hook up with.
Right.
But when we're talking about abuse, these red flags, that's not necessarily a values thing.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not an individual value thing. It's a human value thing.
Mhm.
Right. Exactly.
We all should value not being abused.
Right.
Yes. I think an important thing to point out, too, is a lot of times people do tell you, but in my case, he was very, very careful with his image.
Mm-hmm.
He would put out what he thought people wanted to hear. He would say he portrayed himself a certain way. But there were cracks in that and times when it would slip.
Right.
Yeah.
And instead of excusing those times and defending the facade,
Mm-hmm.
I in hindsight now, of course we learn as we go, but those were red flags that I should not have shrugged off
Right.
and said, somebody who has integrity would not lie about what he just lied about. And
Right.
then he starts to, I realize he's lying to me too.
Right. Now, the thing with abuse, like what you're talking about, Evelyn, is that a one-time incident with someone, while the behavior itself might have been abusive, isn't someone who's abusing someone else.
Right.
It has to be persistent and ongoing for it to become an abusive situation. So when, now with with what you're talking about, sounds like the abuse was kind of all over the map. Like what was happening was different on any given day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually true for a lot of these situations. It's not just someone's being beaten on a regular basis. They're also
Right.
being verbally abused. They're also being psychologically abused. Like it all kind of goes together. And it's just varying degrees of various kinds. But the point is that it's persistent
Yes.
and it's ongoing. That's what makes it an abusive
Yeah.
situation. That's one of the signs.
Right.
Persistent and ongoing behavior that's abusive to you or to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you know.
Yeah. And, some things to look to as far as that goes is like that pattern of being controlled by somebody. Or
Right.
them having to know everywhere you are and everyone you're with, when exactly you're going to be home. They may even go out and check and see how much gas is in your tank.
Right.
That sort of thing.
That's a pattern.
It's a pattern, and it's abusive. And the weird thing is, Sometimes, especially if you're in this weird fog, oh, he just cares about me.
Right. The lies you tell yourself.
Yeah, I've noticed that on both ends of the spectrum on social media. Some people touting it as a red flag that the person they're with wants to know where they are and what they're doing and wants to know all the details. And then other people like, well, they care about me. That's why they want to know. They want to know I'm safe. It's the same
Okay.
behavior, but I'm like, no.
Okay.
That's
so
not a good thing.
my husband and I have an unspoken agreement that we'll let each other know where we're going and when we're going there. We keep a calendar with appointments listed. We tell each other when we're leaving. We tell each other when we're coming home. But it's not because he needs to know where I'm at so that he can control me.
Right.
The whole point of that is so that we can keep track of where each other's are, where each other is in case there's a problem.
Yes. And I think the key there, too, is that it's both of you doing that
Right.
with and for each other.
Right. Because if I said, I'm at 25 minutes away and I'm headed home and I haven't arrived in 25 minutes, he knows something's up.
Yeah. I mean, that's a way to,
I could have been in a car accident. I could be in the hospital.
Yeah.
I could be stuck on the side of the road and my cell phone is dead.
Right.
Yeah.
That would prompt him to wonder where I'm at and wonder if I'm okay.
Right.
That's not the same thing as who were you with? What were you doing?
Right. Or even saying things like,
you can't do that.
I think I should be your best friend.
Right.
Where where that sounds nice, but then you shouldn't have other friends, or you shouldn't have anybody close to you.
Right.
Like there's so many forms it can take.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing wrong with being your best friend as long as you can have other friends besides your significant other.
It's got to be mutual too. Let's not make it one person trying to dictate what the other person's doing. And I think that's, like we said, where the red flag comes in.
Yeah, and when there's a persistent ongoing behavior pattern and you start to feel like something's wrong, you should pay attention to that. Don't gaslight yourself into believing that this is, like you were saying, that he loves me.
Yeah.
Right. If you feel controlled, then you are probably being controlled.
Yeah.
I'm not saying 100% sure all the time, because sometimes we can interpret behavior wrongly.
Right.
And in which case we should ask. If we're not sure, we should say, when you did this thing, why did you do it?
Right.
And if the answer is to control you, whatever way they put it,
right,
then it's probably not abuse. But if the answer is, well, this, that, and the other thing, and it sounds like a control tactic, it's probably abusive.
Yeah.
And you should pay attention to that feeling.
Yeah. And I think it's important to find out what does healthy even look like.
Yes.
So you can spot abuse when it's there. Because I had misinterpreted so much, and seeing actual healthy relationships where there's equality, where they both have a say, it's amazing and refreshing.
Yeah.
But it also helps me realize how bad things really were in my situation. I didn't even know it.
Yeah. I think when people start to, like you're saying, see a different version of something that looks, like you were saying, equal and actually loving, then they can get an idea that, oh, maybe something's wrong. Pay attention to that, please.
Yes.
Don't lie to yourself. That relationship isn't worth it.
Yeah.
I don't care what the relationship is. Spouse, parent, siblings, friends, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not worth it to maintain a relationship that's putting you in a position of danger.
Right. And just because you're in it doesn't mean you have to stay in it.
Right.
It's basically, let's come into reality and act accordingly.
Right.
And the whole point of this is it might not be as straightforward as you want it to be. Manipulation can look like many different things.
Right.
Bad behaviors can look like so many different things. People can play the victim. They can be the dominant one. They can throw a temper tantrum, which I guess is still victim behavior. But my point is that it's not always obvious what's
Right.
happening. But if you have that feeling, that persistent feeling of, I'm being controlled by this person in some way, that's probably abuse.
Yeah.
And you can, you can go to someone, a professional, therapist, whatever, and talk to them and find out for sure. If you're
Yeah.
not sure, I mean, we're going to talk about this. What do I do about it?
Mm-hmm.
But what we're saying is don't just ignore your feeling.
Right. And if somebody sees something, especially somebody who cares about you, but they're saying, or they're trying to warn you, are you okay with him talking to you this way?
Mm-hmm.
Don't just dismiss that.
Right.
Spend a little time. Think about it.
Right.
Nobody deserves to stay in a situation like this.
Yeah. So, to sum up, what we've talked about is that one of the major problems with knowing you're being abused is most people don't know what it is, what it looks like, or even realize they're in a situation that's abusive, because it's not always obvious.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sometimes we tell ourselves things like that's just who they are. There's a lot of ways that we sort of get into this weird bubble of
Denial.
Yeah.
And, because we're afraid to move on, or, I mean, I don't even want to get into domestic violence in terms of like how people deal with that. But a lot of times women who are in those situations will tell themselves all kinds of things. And a lot of times they are in physical danger and have to do things in a certain way to avoid, harm. But, we have to be willing to look at the red flags.
Yeah.
Right.
Pay attention to the feelings that we have.
Yeah.
The behavior patterns that we see, and not listen to the lies that either they're telling us or we're telling ourselves
right,
to keep that situation from exploding on us.
Right.
So, this is kind of a murkier, less clear step-by-step thing than we normally do, because it's literally like that in real life.
It is.
It's very hard to know, but once you do know, you should take action. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about what can you do?
Yeah. Now that you know, what can you do?
Yes.
Yeah. So we'd like to thank you for joining us. And we just want to remind you that, sharing is caring.
That's right.
Yes.
If you're listening to this episode and you think of somebody who could use this information, share it with them.
Yes.
You don't even have to tell them why.
Right.
You just send them the link. We also are doing reels on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, and YouTube.
Yes.
Although on YouTube they're called shorts. But we're making these videos about this sort of thing. We're talking about these topics because we're hoping that somebody will listen.
Yes.
As our friend Clive that we interviewed a while back said, if we help one person, it's worth it.
It's worth it.
Definitely worth it.
All the effort that we put in, the planning, the recording, the editing, the creating the videos, et cetera, it's work.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's a fun Saturday afternoon activity. It is work, and we are putting in sacrifices to make this happen. So, share this stuff.
Yes, please do.
And let's make this podcast grow. Right?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Dunham.
I'm Evelyn Mason.
I'm Richelle Knapp.
Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us as we discussed such an important topic. We hope you got some food for thought and encouragement to keep going and keep growing. See you later, Bear Club.